Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here for another edition of the American Experience Distinguished Lecture Series. For nearly a half century, this series has welcomed numerous distinguished speakers and attendees. But if one is to judge the quality of the show by the quality of this audience, this just proves that tonight we have one that is going to top all of them. And that is because it is my privilege to welcome three Pennsylvania governors who are here with us this evening: Governor Ed Rendell, Governor Tom Ridge, and Governor Dick Thornburgh. Collectively, these three statesmen represent the executive leadership of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for 22 of its past 40 years. But more to the point, they represent the type of sound, principled, and ethnic leadership that we all need and deserve. It is truly an honor for all of us at the University of Pittsburgh to host them this evening. Now, I have to tell you, it's actually not that easy to get three Pennsylvania governors in one room at the same time. And if you're tempted to try, I have to warn you that there seems to be almost an unspoken security protocol that is in place to prohibit this from happening. But that we've managed to successfully pull it off tonight can be attributed to three insiders without whom we would not have been successful. And so I want to gratefully acknowledge Rick Stafford, who has served as Governor Thornburgh's Chief of Staff, Mark Holman, who served as Governor Ridge's Chief of Staff, and Kevin Washoe, who serves as my Chief of Staff, but more importantly, also worked for Governor Rendell. All three were involved in planning this event from the very beginning, and Kevin, of course, played a very significant role representing the host institution, so I want to thank all three of you as well. And finally, I want to point out that this event is yet another provocative and stimulating example of programming that is provided through the Dick Thornburgh Forum for Law and Public Policy. Ginny and Dick have established this forum, which is within Pitt's Institute of Politics, in a very thoughtful, intentional, and very hands-on Thornburgh way. The Thornburgh Forum fosters public engagement, education, and civic action on the important policy issues of the day, but more succinctly, the forum builds upon and extends Governor Thornburgh's legacy, specifically his vision of an engaged public, creating effective and principled governance. I can't think of anything more vital to the present and future of our Commonwealth. All of us at Pitt are proud to be part of that legacy through the Thornburgh Forum. One of the important things we do to that end is to host nonpartisan forums, such as the one we are about to enjoy, where diverse viewpoints are shared, discussed, and applied to our common goal of improving the quality of life for everyone in the region. On that note, it is a distinct pleasure for me to invite Mark Nordenberg, Director of the Thornburgh Forum, Chair of the Institute of Politics, and Chancellor Emeritus of the University of Pittsburgh, to come forward, and Mark will present the Elsie Illard Hillman Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Public Service. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, and good evening, everyone. In 2012, the Institute of Politics of the University of Pittsburgh created the Elsie Hilliard Hillman Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Public Service. The award was intended to serve both as a lasting tribute to Elsie's own remarkable life of public service and as a way to honor others whose strong, sustained, and distinctive contributions were worthy of this special form of commendation. The first Elsie Award was presented to Elsie herself. That presentation occurred right here in Carnegie Music Hall, and among the key participants were Governor Dick Thornburgh and Governor Tom Ridge, who sat on this stage and offered perspectives both on Elsie's legacy and on American political life. No timetable was set for subsequent presentations. Instead, it was expected that future presentations would be made as appropriate, and in the more than 7 years that have followed, the award has been presented only one other time. As we planned this event, though, it became apparent that this would be the perfect occasion to recognize Dick Thornburg's extraordinary lifetime of impact and achievement through public service by presenting him with the Elsie Hilliard Hillman Award. Obviously, the setting is ideal since Elsie received her award here. And the fact that Elsie and Dick have been friends and allies since the days of their youth is apparent from the photograph now showing on the big screen and also included in your program. What makes the presentation of the award to Governor Thornburg most appropriate, though, is the amazing record of accomplishments and contributions that have characterized his life. Think first about all of the critical positions he has held. United States Attorney for Western Pennsylvania, Assistant U.S. Attorney General in charge of the Criminal Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, two-term Governor of Pennsylvania, United States Attorney General under both President Ronald Reagan and President George Herbert Walker Bush, and Undersecretary General of the United Nations. It is a record that few in the history of our Commonwealth or even in the history of our country have equaled. What is most impressive about Dick, though, is not that he held each of these important positions, but that he did so much good in all of them. Among the countless examples that might be cited, let me mention just two, one from Harrisburg and one from Washington. Just 2 months into his first term as governor, the crisis in the nuclear power plant at 3 Mile Island near Harrisburg became his very public responsibility. 40 years later, the calm, confident, competent approach that he took is still regarded as an inspiring case study of effective leadership at a time of crisis. Later, as Attorney General, Dick became the point person for President George Herbert Walker Bush in securing the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, advancing what has been a lifelong and heartfelt cause for both Dick and Ginny Thornburg, and in the process passing what can fairly be viewed as one of the most sweeping pieces of civil rights legislation in our country's history, legislation that affected the lives of some 50 million Americans. In signing that act into law, President Bush said this: 3 weeks ago, we celebrated the nation's Independence Day. Today, we're here to rejoice and celebrate another Independence Day, one that is long overdue. With today's signing of the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, every man, woman, and child with a disability can now pass through the once closed doors into a bright new era of equality, independence, and freedom. We all know that the full potential of that act is yet to be realized, but its passage was a giant form of progress, and Dick played a huge role in its enactment. Equally remarkable and also important, given both the personality and character of the woman for whom this award is named, and the incivility that is too often a part of public life in America today, is the fact that Governor Thornburg's years in all of those high-powered positions, dealing with all of those high-powered people, and dealing with some of the most important issues of our time, has not in any way changed his warm and welcoming human touch. In a recent discussion, he deflected expressions of praise that were headed his way by referring to himself as just a humble public servant. That is, in fact, the way he presents himself, because that is the way that he feels about himself. Put another way, Dick Thornburg has always taken his work very seriously without ever taking himself too seriously, which is a wonderful combination of human qualities. Dick has never wavered from his uncompromising commitment to high performance standards, to integrity, to respectfulness and courtesy, and over the course of his career, he always has been driven by a strong, selfless, and unchanging desire to contribute to the greater good. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great privilege to ask Samantha Balbier, who is the director of both the Institute of Politics and the Elsie Hillman Forum, and Patrick Gallagher, the Chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, to join in making this presentation to Governor Thornburg, which you'll be able to view on the screen. And it also is my privilege to invite you to join in delivering to Governor Thornburg a heartfelt expression of thanks for all that he has accomplished and for the inspiring example he has set for all of the rest of us. And all I can say, Dick, is we're glad they never made you commissioner of baseball so you could do these other things. As Chancellor Gallagher indicated, and as you will have noted from the program, the American Experience lecture series, which will celebrate its golden anniversary this next year, is co-sponsored by the University Honors College and the Dick Thornburg Forum for Law and Public Policy. The Honors College is located on the 35th and 36th floors of the Cathedral of Learning, the two highest floors that are available to the public, which is appropriate because the Honors College is committed to the very highest levels of student attainment. The Honors College is led by Acting Dean Audrey Morell, who is a professor of business and of psychology and of public and international affairs. She is a longtime member of the Pitt faculty who has left her mark everywhere she has been, including most recently as the dean responsible for the College of Business Administration. Having seen her in action, I can say that Audrey has an almost magical way with students. She also has received important forms of recognition for her tireless service activities in the broader community. Let me present Dean Morell to you now to provide a brief introduction of our special governor guests. We really are in the company of giants tonight, and our distinguished moderator. Audrey?
Thank you, Mark. As we were planning and discussing this event, Mark actually shared a story with me that then Congressman Ridge, who represented a district in Erie when he first ran for governor, a journalist from the eastern part of the state described him as the guy no one has ever heard of from that place no one's ever been. Clearly, his name recognition has blossomed significantly since that time. In fact, it might be said that neither of our governor guests needs any introduction. However, since they've given me a minute of fame, let me offer just a few thoughts about why they are so perfect for this program. Let me begin with some of the similarities. Both Governor Ridge and Governor Rendell are lawyers who served as prosecutors early in their careers. Both are widely recognized as strong leaders. Each of them was elected to 2 terms as Pennsylvania's governor, and each of them has a national following and is widely recognized in every part of the country. In addition to his years in Congress, Tom Ridge became this country's first Secretary of Homeland Security, assuming that position at the request of President George W. Bush in the wake of the attacks of September 11th, 2001. He was also widely believed to be on the short list of vice presidential candidates for the campaigns of Senator Bob Dole and John McCain. Before he was elected governor, Ed Rendell had served for 8 years as the highly visible mayor of Philadelphia. In fact, Al Gore dubbed him America's mayor, though some have said that he ran for governor because he was really looking for a much easier job. He served as both the chair of the National Democratic Party and as the chair of the National Governors Association, and still makes frequent appearances as a political commentator on national television programs. So those are some similarities. What about the differences? They are lifelong members of opposing political parties, Governor Ridge, a Republican, Governor Rendell, a Democrat, and as their party affiliation suggests, they have policy differences. They also have very different styles. Getting to the important thing, Governor Ridge, who was actually born here in Pittsburgh, cheers for the Steelers. While Governor Rendell cheers for that other team, has something to do with birds, I'm not sure what to call him. Among the things we might expect to see tonight are the sometimes competing views on the issue of the day. We will learn from these 2 amazing leaders how people from different political parties can share a stage and discuss issues that challenge us all and challenge us on how we can become more engaged citizens and work for the collective good. We are very fortunate that Dave Davies is here to moderate this discussion. Mr. Davies, too, has both strong Pennsylvania roots and a national following. He is the dean of political journalism in Philadelphia, having covered government and politics for more than 30 years. He is also a regular contributor to and sometimes host of National Public Radio's Fresh Air with Terry Gross. Let me again thank you all for being here tonight, and I turn the program over to Mr. Davies.
Thank you so much, Audrey. A lot of experience and wisdom that we all look forward to learning from here tonight. You know, we asked those of you who are in attendance to submit a question to ask if you'd like to, and we'll get to some, but it was interesting to me that easily half of the questions were some form of what do we do about this dreadful, destructive, partisan divide in the country now, and how do we begin to come together? So with that in mind, I'm going to begin with a divisive question. Maybe not. But it's, we're all watching this drama unfold in Washington, and I want to ask you both, based on the available information, do you believe the president's actions with respect to Ukraine amount to impeachable offenses? Governor Ridge?
Geez, thank you for that opening question.
You thought this was going to be easy?
Oh, yeah, let's talk about bipartisanship. Well, before I respond to that very appropriate question, I want to join the Governor Thornburg's family and friends and publicly acknowledge his extraordinary life of public service. But I must say, Governor, I suspect you also would say that you couldn't do it without Ginny. And Ginny is very much reflective of the qualities of Elsie Hillman and your qualities as well. So Ginny, on behalf of all the First Ladies, and Ed had a little different situation. He had a judge. But those of us who had First Ladies, your participation in his extraordinary career is recognized by Pennsylvanians throughout, and we're grateful for that as well. Thank you, Ginny. Oh, now that simple softball you just threw me. Let's see where I am on this. I'll tell you exactly where I am. I'm a big believer in the rule of law, although sometimes in the public discussion about certain events in and around Washington, there's some people that don't believe there are three branches of government. There is a third branch, the legislative branch, that some people in Washington sometimes demean or denigrate as if they didn't exist. As far as I'm concerned, that conversation is worthy of the kind of investigation that Speaker Pelosi has laid out on behalf of the House of Representatives. I don't believe Vice President Biden's name is mentioned had he not been a presidential candidate. And as a couple people are willing to say, and even the president has said, well, people don't wake up every morning talking about corruption in Ukraine. That you and I know. So I find it disturbing revelation. It is something that the president has admitted that he did. They sent out the redacted statement. So under those circumstances, I'm not in a position to say whether it rises to the level of a high crime or misdemeanor. I find it disturbing. Well, I find it beyond disturbing because it didn't belong in that conversation. But whether it rises to the level of affirmative action, both in the House, remember it's got to go to the Senate, it's beyond my ability to predict. But I do think the Democrats have every right, and I might add, I think they have, under the circumstances, both the authority and the responsibility to get behind that conversation, and then we'll let the process work itself out. So I don't think it's a partisan issue.
So we need to get to the bottom of it. Governor Rendell.
Well, let me join with Tom to congratulate Dick. It's an honor to be here on a night with the Dick Thornburgh Policy Forum, and a night that you're being honored, Dick. Dick Thornburgh set an incredibly high bar for integrity in government for not only Pennsylvania governors to try to meet, but for governors all over the United States. And it's a true honor to be here in your name. And Ginny, you set an equally high bar for spouses of governors to meet in your graciousness and your advocacy, your effective advocacy. It's important for spouses to be equal partners with the governor and be effective advocates, and you set the bar awfully high. So congratulations to both of you. It's an equally great honor for me to share a stage with Tom Ridge, who's a true American patriot and clearly the second best governor in Pennsylvania's history.
We were getting along so well in the back room.
The answer to your question, Dave, is yes. But let me expound just a little bit. What the president said, in my judgment, and I will agree that there is some legal scholars who differ, but what the president admitted to is, in my judgment, a crime. and it is a high crime. It is a crime because he solicited a foreign country to get involved in the United States election, which is clearly illegal and prohibited by the Constitution. It doesn't matter whether there was a quid pro quo, although when he says, after the Ukrainian president brings up the question of javelins, when he says, I want you to do me a favor, though, he clearly was attaching a quid pro quo in my mind, and the external evidence, I think, will prove that beyond a doubt. But it's not necessary. The crime is soliciting, asking a foreign government to get involved in an American election is a high crime in my judgment. It's a high crime, and we Democrats need to explain this to the American people. Because let's assume the president was holding and did delay the grant of aid to the Ukraine to buy effective anti-tank weapons. He was making the Ukraine vulnerable to Russian attack because of his desire to use it to advance his own political interest. And if Russia came into the Ukraine, and because the Ukraine didn't have these weapons, swept through and took over control of the country, that would pose a serious security threat to every American man, woman, and child. We would be in much greater danger of having a conflict in Eastern Europe if Russia seized all of Ukraine. So, in my judgment, Donald Trump put the nation at significant risk to advance his own political interest in a way that's clearly illegal.
All right, so let me follow up with a somewhat different question. Governor Ridge, it's clear in your mind that this merits serious investigation. If the facts suggest that there is an impeachable offense, is it the right thing to do for the country? Impeachment is itself an inherently political process. Given we're 14 months before the next election, should Congress, if the facts warrant, proceed to impeach the president now? Who wants it?
I'll take that. I was against impeachment and said so on television early on because I thought impeachment was a futile act. I thought there would probably be enough, maybe not uncovered yet. I didn't know Ukraine was going to happen. But I thought there might be enough, but maybe not. And despite that, the Congress could impeach the president, but the Senate was never going to convict. There aren't more than 2 Republican senators, Senator Romney and Senator Sass, who I think, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, would vote to convict. So you'd be impeaching the president to no end. He was not going to be removed from office. And you would be further inflaming his base, making it more likely that his base would have an exceptionally high turnout, making it more likely that he would be elected president. And I thought, from a political standpoint, the most important thing for us as Democrats was to retake the White House in 2020. So I was against impeachment. But when the Ukrainian incident happened, it took it to a whole new level for me. And I said so because this affects national security. This is in my judgment, such a betrayal by an American president that if we don't impeach, it sends all of the wrong messages to this American president. Remember, this is a fellow who 3 days after the Mueller report became public, so in his words, exonerating him, went out and did this. Do you think the exoneration that he felt from the Mueller report spurred him to do this? What happens if he doesn't get impeached?
Okay, Governor, I think you've made your point well. Let me turn to Governor Ridge here on this.
Yeah,
your thought on this.
Let me just comment on that, if I might. I agree with Ed to it almost completely, but what I think is really important is that there may be some serious collateral engagements with the Ukrainian government by other individuals in the administration. Is it a one-off and a phone call that a lot of us find very troubling, disturbing? It's not presidential in my judgment. That doesn't, in my mind, rise to a high level of misdemeanor. But that's why I think the investigative process, and I give the Speaker credit, there's not going to be any other issues involved in that investigation. It's about the basis for the conversation with the Ukrainian president. And if there were other individuals in the administration involved in that exercise, or was a one-off, a single phone call, I think the potential for generating Republican support in the Senate, which I agree with you, Ed, right now, absent that, I just don't think that you'd get that support. That's why I don't like to use the word process. Keep it focused, but here's what we have, and they have a constitutional responsibility to do it. Let's take a look at this conversation. There are other people were there people who communicated to the president that that aid was being withheld until that favor was granted? Were there other conversations with others involved in the Ukrainian administration that had influence with that president? I don't know the answers to that. There's plenty of speculation out there, and I think it's best to let that focus, specific focus on not just the conversation, but some ancillary engagement, may have been critical engagement, and I think depending on those answers and those revelations, it's conceivable you could have the Republicans in the Senate. At the end of the day, they have also the constitutional responsibility to vote their conscience, and before they registered as a Republican, they were born as an American, and I think they have to sometimes put that partisanship aside and say, what did he do? Does it rise to that level? But I don't think it's a little premature, in my judgment, to make that decision right now.
All right, we're going to move on, but I just want to correct. I think I said we're 14 months before the next presidential election. It's actually what? It's 13, isn't it? It's a month and a year. Okay. You know, everyone says we need to bridge the partisan divide. But the answer is often, well, it's those jerks in the other party that have to change their behavior. So I want to ask each of you something that you think the leaders of your party can and should do that would help move us into a more positive direction.
Well, I think you focused on the appropriate targets, if it were, those who have the ultimate responsibility to lead their delegations and to really set the tone for the political debate. I don't think either party can go into equity court with clean hands, given the accusations, the personal accusations that they've thrown at each other, not just this year, the past couple of years. This has been going on since the Bork nomination, back and forth, and it has become progressively more and more. I use the word toxic because right now it is very toxic. And so you take that, this rabid partisanship, both parties moving more and more toward an ideological base, ignoring that the Constitution is a series of compromises. You add that on top of that, the role that identity politics through the emergence of the technological revolution that is playing in the political environment. And I, for one, think that the social media, while it's designed as a good platform to communicate, is also a forum for bullies, malcontents, and cowards, because you can say some things on social media that you wouldn't say to somebody's face, and you're not held accountable for what you throw out there. So I think there's a combination of circumstances that have created this environment. Your question is very relevant. The tone has to change with the leaders. The most important leader, and I don't like a tweeting president at all. I think it may be he can get over the media that he's denigrated at every moment, but I think the leadership at both parties, and here's because the president is doing that doesn't mean the leaders of both caucuses should do it. I'd certainly like to see the leaders in both the House and Senate R's and D's go after each other in a really partisan way if you want. It's ideas that matter. But the cult of personality politics and the meanness attributed to some of their statements and the moral judgments they cast about other people's point of view, I think is inappropriate. But it's going to start with the leaders demanding more. And frankly, it's going to start with the public demanding more from them as well, from the general public.
And before I go on to Governor Rendell, I just want to ask you one specific question on this subject, Governor Ridge. In 2016, when there was a Supreme Court nomination opened up, and Mitch McConnell, the majority leader of the Senate, said, we're not going to have a hearing for Merrick Garland. We're going to save that seat for the next president. That's something that Democrats remember and bitterly resent. What was your view of that move?
Mine?
Yeah, of Senator.
Yeah, it was, listen, politics. That's exactly why he did it. I think frankly, I could have argued very definitely the vacancy occurred during the last year of President Obama's administration. I would have preferred to see him take it to the floor.
Okay. Governor
And
Rendell,
it has therefore created that environment from now on. People are going to look at the Supreme Court nominees and that whole process through a much more political lens, a much more political prism than they've ever done before. It's been creeping in that direction, but that put an exclamation point on that process and made it far more political in the average citizen's mind, who doesn't pay a great deal of attention to the process of Supreme Court nominees. But when you throw down that roadblock, when historically it's not been done, you've created a perception, maybe not a perception, you created a notion that this is far more political, and that's the only way we're going to appoint justices.
thank you. Governor Rendell, your thoughts on what Democratic leaders can do.
Well, I'll answer that. Interestingly, when McConnell refused to bring President Obama's nomination to the floor, I think the Democrats made a mistake. I would have had a citizens taxpayer suit asking the court to mandamus the Senate leader to bring the nomination to the floor.
Interesting.
I think we had terrific standing as citizens because the court was deadlocked on many decisions, 3-3. You could prove that by just rolling out the decisions that the court made shortly after the opening occurred. And we have as citizens, we have the right to have the court in a position to effectively decide cases. I think we might have won that suit, and we should have done it. Because what happens if there's a Democratic president in 2021 and a Republican Senate, and Mitch McConnell decides to do it for 4 years? Not give the Democratic president the right to have a hearing on any of his nominations. He could think up some spurious reason, just as spurious as the last year of his presidency. You've got to fight back sometimes, and I think we took that one sitting down far too easily. What can Democratic leaders do? Well, I think this is an unusual time. Really, the answer to this question is very, very involved, but it comes from the fact that the base of the Republican Party and the base of the Democratic Party happen to be on the extreme political parts of the ideological spectrum. And those bases vote heavily in primaries. So in primaries, candidates tend to cater to the bases. So it's very difficult for Democratic candidates for any office, Senate, Congress, or the presidency, to go into a primary and be willing to reach across the aisle. There are Democrats, every time I'm on TV and say, good Lord, let's at least pass an infrastructure bill. There's general agreement in the Congress that we need an infrastructure bill, and time is really short. Let's pass a compromise and get some infrastructure dollars into the system. Well, Democrats attack me by saying, the last thing we want to do is give President Trump a good bill that he can sign. Well, good Lord, bridges are going to collapse. People are going to get injured on roads that are unpassable. And we're standing back and saying politics is going to let us tie things up for at least another year and a half. That's ridiculous. And the base of my party is as ridiculous, well, almost as ridiculous as the Tea Party. So what I would do now if I was a Senate leader or a House leader in our party, I would go and have a private meeting with the Republican leadership and say, we won't quote you, but you guys know this president's out of his mind. And we've got to do something to save the country, and we've got to do something on immigration, and we've got to do something on infrastructure. Let's pass something. We can't let this go for another 2 years. And then try to work out a compromise where everyone stands shoulder to shoulder on a good immigration bill, or at least on some immigration aspects of a bill, and on infrastructure. Show that the United States Congress can still act as a body that puts the American citizen first. And one thing we've got to do, and I say this reluctantly because I was always against it, we have to have term limits for Congress.
I was gonna move on, but I just have to ask you, Governor, don't you think Chuck Schumer has thought of that?
What?
Don't you think Chuck Schumer has thought of going to Mitch McConnell and saying, look, we know what we're up against, let's do this something together? Hasn't he tried that?
He probably thinks it would be a futile act, but I would try, even if I believed it was a futile act.
Okay.
I think it's worth a try. The stakes are too high.
I want to ask you both what national media you read, watch, and listen to? And is there any that you avoid or recommend that others avoid? Serious question.
I watch Ed Rendell on NBC.
I watch everything and read everything except for Breitbart.
Okay, so you read Fox, you watch Fox News?
I'm on Fox News a lot. And I think one of the big mistakes Tom Perez made, and Tom Perez is the current chairman of the Democratic Party, was refusing to let Fox have one of the Democratic debates. I would have told Fox if I was still chairman, I said, give us Martha McSally, give us Chris Wallace and Shep Smith, and we'll debate anytime, anywhere in the country. Because those three people are journalists who are as fair as anybody on CNN, anybody on any of the networks, anybody on MSNBC. Give me those three Fox journalists to conduct a debate, and we'll do it any place and any time.
Yeah, I agree with Ed. I think they made a huge mistake. I think
Huge mistake.
Once you've got the microphone, you can control, and I think it would send a great signal to Republicans who may be ambivalent about the Trump presidency, one, that they were willing to go on to explain their points of view and willing to take on Fox. I frankly don't watch much TV because I don't find much, with few exceptions, I know where they're coming from before the show opens. So I'm not looking really for advocates for a point of view, because we generally know. But to Ed's point, I think there are certain TV journalists that try to be objective, and there's some, and every once in a while I'll turn on a station just to see what the latest rhetoric is. But I prefer to get my information. Frankly, I don't mind editorials on some of the critical newspapers. BBC, TV, if you're looking for a version of world events. The Economist is a good thing to read from time to time, because you get a perspective, international perspective on what we're doing. And occasionally if there's a special on TV. But I frankly think the only thing worth watching are sometimes just the Sunday shows when they got, I think you're right about Chris Wallace. I think he's terrific. I frankly think Stephanopoulos turns on a pretty good interview. And some of those, but they're too few and far between. The daily shows are just almost an advocacy group for the respective national parties. And I've already figured out some like President Trump and some don't like him. I don't have to hear that anymore.
Well, I'm a little wounded that nobody mentioned NPR, but I'll get over it. Governor Ridge, what about the mainstream newspapers, the Washington Post, the New York Times, that the president derides as fake news? Do you find them credible, reliable? Do you read them?
Yeah, well, I remember, listen, I know and Ed knows that newspapers, depending on how the photo they use, the commentary they use, can directly or indirectly make a statement. But, I like the editorial pages. And these two newspapers will have a Republican and a Democrat. I want to read that. I want to read thoughtful analysis from their perspective as to what's going on, rather than the babble that you get from the talking heads. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't educate. And frankly, some of the stuff, it infuriates me, because I think Americans deserve better than they're getting on some of that. So I like some of the Sunday shows, and I know there's a bias there generally, okay? But if you take a look, they normally have other columnists from disparate points of view, so read them both. I mean, I don't know. Some of the TV's become more of an echo chamber rather than
Well, Governor Rendell, you're still
source
one
of
of our
education, and I think it disappoints the daylights out of me.
Governor Rendell, you're still one of our favorite talking heads, Governor. Did you want to wrap up with anything? I'm going to move on.
Just one quick thing. I think the Republicans and the president who complain about the media being biased, there's some people in the media who are biased, but the media, like the Inquirer in Philadelphia, does a pretty good job of finding Republican voices to write op-ed pieces as much as Democrat voices. But the New York Times, you can make a strong case and a persuasive case that the New York Times cost Hillary Clinton the presidency. And the New York Times was manifestly unfair to Hillary Clinton from the beginning of the server thing, which, as it turns out, everybody had done before her and people continue to do after her. How many of you watched Colbert? Anybody watch Colbert? You have to be someone who goes to sleep pretty late to watch Colbert. But I love the show when he showed a clip of an audience, and it looked like a real audience. It was very mixed in age and whatever. And they were yelling, lock her up, about Hillary, talking about the server. Trump had said something about her server, lock her up, lock her up. Then the news came out that day that 7 people in the White House, including Ivanka, used a private server as well. And Colbert flashed to the same audience, and they were yelling, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. So I think there's a bias in the media, and the bias is against public officials. Not necessarily untoward, but a bias that has some backing to it.
Sensationalism, yeah. I want to talk about your leadership in the Commonwealth and as mayor and as Homeland Security Secretary. You know, I've spent a long time covering government, and one of the things that I have come to truly believe is how rare and important good leadership is. And it has, you know, all of these different elements, right? I mean, you got to be smart, you got to have a vision for governing, you got to be deep in policy, you have to attract and keep really smart people, but you have to delegate power and keep them accountable, you have to be a good public communicator, you need an inside game to deal with all the legislators and other constituents, you know. Stamina is important, work ethic. And I think all of you both bring a lot of those elements to the job, but I want to ask you to reflect a little bit on your own leadership skills and experience, and ask each of you to give me a leadership trait that you thought a strong one that you brought to the office, and one that you realized after some time you needed to work on or compensate for in some way. I will say that I sent this question to these guys a few days ago. I hope they read the email, to give it some thought, since I think this is kind of, we might want to reflect on the experience. Governor Ridge, what do you think?
My server was down. Well, looking back, accepting your premise that we were strong leaders, I think both Ed and I hope we were, because I think both Ed and I thought that, and I'm sure Governor Thornburgh thought as well, when you get that responsibility and opportunity to lead a state, that you want to try to affect change in a positive way, not just across the board for all citizens of the Commonwealth. I mean, ultimately, as governor, your constituency isn't just those who voted for you, your constituents also those who voted for your opponent. And so you got to take that mindset. I think as I look back at that, I guess I would say this to you. I thought it was important for everyone in my administration to have a prism to look at, and we're going to try to be very, very innovative. I mean, we really wanted to affect change. And so what's the prism that you want your cabinet to look at? And I said, with every innovation, every change, every thought, will it make Pennsylvania, and my cabinet members could repeat this in their sleep, can they make Pennsylvania a leader among states and a competitor among nations? Because we are competing in a global economy. So whatever we're doing, education, the environment, tax policy, is it good or better than anything else the states are doing? But it does also position the Commonwealth to compete as a small country. But that was coupled with, and I think good leaders empower smart people. And that means you delegate authority and responsibility to those you trust. So I think it's a good vision. Give them a prism to look at innovation and change and have them match their consideration of that change with your vision. But once they've come up with something, if you decide, go do it, and I'll back you all the way. So it's a vision plus the empowerment to smart people. Empowerment, the delegation of authority to capable people enhances your capacity to affect change and, frankly, enhances your leadership.
I heard this a lot when I talked to people about your term as governor. All right, so what was hard? What was something that you found hard?
I'm sorry?
What was an aspect of leadership that you found difficult? Was there anything that you know, you said, maybe I need to improve my game on this a little bit when you got to the...
Oh, no, I was...
No.
No, self-assessment's very good. I think, and my team would probably tell you, I tried not to manifest this publicly, but sometimes I got impatient with the process and the time it took to convince some people that this was the right thing to do ultimately. So I think the other thing that's required of you is disappointment should never be expressed publicly, impatience should be private. And I think as I look back, there were a couple of times, and my chief of staff and others would tell you the door would be closed in the governor's office, and I would express my disappointment.
Ed Rendell never did that. Governor Rendell, so rate yourself. What were you great at? What did you need to work on?
Well, I think that strong leadership depends on two or three important things. One, you have to care about something. And I always say you have to care about something that's so important to you, you're willing to risk losing. If you're not willing to risk losing the office you hold for something that you want to get done, you should never have run for office in the first place. So you have to bring to the job things you want to get done that you care very deeply about. Because, by the way, the people around you and the people in the legislature, they'll sense if you don't really care. You know, I was able to get an increase in educational spending every year that I was governor for 8 years. Sometimes we had no budget until December, one year until December 20th. But they knew that I would hang in there till the end, so eventually they gave me either all or a good portion of what I was asking for. So you've got to convey that you really care about things deeply. It's number one. Number two, you have to communicate well. Communicate not only to people in the legislature, but to the public. You've got to build a case for the things that you want. And you've also got to communicate to your own workforce. You've got to imbue them with the importance of getting things done. So when I talk to people in the city, for example, about the city law department, about collecting back taxes more effectively, I translate it into, if we collect this amount of back taxes, we can buy this amount of school books that we're not buying for our kids right now. You put it in human terms, so it's not just statistics or numbers on a piece of paper, but they know if they collect more in back taxes, we can use that to benefit kids or older people or the like. And then thirdly, you've got to stay the course, but in the words of a great country music singer, you've got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Because nothing gets done in exactly the form that you want it to get done in. That took me a couple of years in Harrisburg. In Philadelphia, I was able to, because John Street had such control over city council, I was able to get everything almost exactly as I wanted it. But in Harrisburg, I learned that you can make progress, but you're never going to get an absolute. And when I left office, the Harrisburg Patriot said, they examined my 10 most important campaign promises from the 2002 election and said on each and every one of these promises, he made substantial progress. Well, in fact, we never got 100% of any of the things that I promised, but we got 75%, we got 60%, we got 90%. We made substantial progress towards achieving our goal, and that was awfully good. So I think at the beginning, I didn't understand the process. I was a little naive. I thought, well, gee, people are going to do this because it's the right thing to do. It doesn't happen in politics. You have to put yourself in the people who are sitting across the table from you. You have to put yourself in their seat and say, what do they need to agree to what I want? And even if they need something that's not really great, if it's going to affect what you want by 10%, but you're going to get 90% of what you wanted, do it. Do it. And you can't hold out the old saying about don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. Absolutely right. That was a learning process for me, and there were some painful lessons along the way.
You know, just I might add, if you don't mind, I think Ed's onto something there. I think Ed and I would probably agree that you can't be afraid to lose in the political world. If not, you can't be an effective governor. You certainly can't be an effective legislator. If your whole purpose of existence is your next election cycle, then you shouldn't be there in the first place. So I think Ed and I would probably say we won more battles than we lost. There were some great disappointments. I thought I had the votes on vouchers. Now, I didn't. I come up a couple short, but that's all right. They did it. And the flip side of that, I remember 4 days before the Republican primary for governor, I voted for the assault weapon ban, and people said you could lose. Well, I said, if I lose because I don't think my neighbor should buy an assault weapon, that's fine with me. So you've got to say to yourself, you've got to be true to your own azimuth, your own compass, passionate about what you believe in, and be afraid to lose. But as Ed pointed out, you pick it up and move out the next day. Governor is the most exciting job in America. It's a universe you can put your arms around. And if you're smart enough to reach out to those on the other side of the aisle from time to time, and you build that good relationship, and maybe it was easier to do back then when you and I were governor than it is today, but I got to tell you, whenever we could pull in, and frankly, a lot of the Democrat legislators from Philly and from Pittsburgh, people say, oh, they're just going to vote, they're just going to vote your way. No. If there was an interest to them, you could work with them on legislation. So you can't be afraid to lose. You got to pick up the next day and move on to the next opportunity to affect change, to advance the common good. And doggone it, you represent not just your base that voted for you, you represented some other folks too. And I would tell you, Ed and I had a great relationship. Look what we did with Stadium. And
Gas tax?
pardon me?
The gas tax?
Absolutely. And we got the Republicans vote for it, Democrats voted for it, organized labor voted for it. I mean, we figured out a way on some of these critical issues to make sure that it was bipartisan. There was some heavy lifting, but the country's a lot better off when both parties do big things together. And I think Ed and I had a pretty good record when he was mayor. And by the way, Mayor Murphy, too, another good friend, another capable public servant. So those attributes, the willingness to reach across the aisle, facilitate and, frankly, enhance your leadership capacity.
And Dave, if I can just add real quickly, I think Tom's statement about sticking with what you believe in cost him the vice presidency. I really believe if he had, like many Republican politicians who start out pro-choice, if he had said he had a enlightened moment and now he was pro-life, I think he would have been nominated once or twice for vice president.
Well, this brings up an interesting.
Pretty good.
This brings up an interesting subject because you both had careers at the national level and were talked about as presidential or vice presidential level. Do you agree with what Ed Rendell just said? That had you
been
changed your
pro-life?
position, that you might have been a vice presidential candidate, Governor Ridge? And did you aspire to it? Tell us how you looked at it.
I would just say that I know Ed talked about the base and the parties. I am, on some of those issues, far more libertarian than I am any other way in terms of if we are the party of personal responsibility, personal accountability, on that very difficult issue, also on issue with regard to gay rights and some of those others. I'm not where the majority of Republican primary voters in some of the key states would be. So, frankly, I am where I am. You either accept it or you reject it, and I appreciate Ed's analysis. But at the time, there were other good candidates that, well, it's a presidential nominee.
How much did you want it, Governor?
That's the way it goes.
How much did you want it?
Pardon me?
How much did you want to be a vice presidential candidate?
I never aspired to be anything other than governor. I mean, that I wanted to be. I think if lightning strikes and you're given the opportunity to serve your country and your party running at a national level, would I have embraced it and accepted it? You bet. Would I have worked hard to get elected? You're darn right. There's only one way. But,
I've heard you know exactly.
But I don't think you go looking for that. I just think it happens. And it didn't happen in my case. And quite frankly, the best thing that happened to me, at least the opportunity to take my service from a governor of the great state that I love to serving my president right after 9/11, frankly, in the scheme of things, I'm glad he called.
Good. I've heard that you know the exact number of days you served as governor because you loved it so much. True?
Oh, listen.
Yeah.
There's no other. I mean, you're chief executive of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I mean, the challenges. I think you probably agree, Ed. I don't know. It's one thing to be in a Senate. You're one of 100. It's a good job. It's an important job. But when you're the leader of a state, of any state, and you build your own infrastructure, when you're in the cabinet secretaries, I had a difficult, challenging job. Fortunately, we had tremendous help. I had a lot of bipartisan help to get it started, by the way back in Congress, from both the House Democrats and the Senate Democrats. But ultimately, when you're a cabinet member, you're not a voice, you're an echo. And so you're not exactly affecting the kind of change you want to affect as you would if you're governor. And so that's the way it is, and I'm glad the president called.
Governor Rendell, I'm going to go back to 1993. I went to your office. This when you were in your early years as mayor of Philadelphia. You were a huge success. Al Gore called you America's mayor. And I asked you, how big could this go? Could you become president? Do you remember what you said?
I said I didn't think I was presidential timber.
I'll tell you what you said. You said no, immediately no, no. I said, really? Why? And you said, because I'm Jewish. We'll have a black president or a woman president before we have a Jewish president.
Well, I was right.
Well, we haven't had a woman yet.
But if I'd answered it totally honestly, even when I was DA and when I was mayor, I just never thought of myself as president of the United States. When I first learned about politics, there were giants in office, people like FDR and Dwight Eisenhower, and I never thought I was on the par in many characteristics to make a president. And then as I got older and spent more time in politics, and I started saying, Governor Jones is running for president. I said, that guy running for president? And I started to meet some of these candidates for president. I said, my God, if he's running, I can run. But the time was never right for me. The best time for me to run would have been 2008. But Hillary Clinton was running, and everyone assumed she would be our nominee. And then this young senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, threw his hat in the ring. And I wouldn't have run against Hillary in any event. But that was it. And after that, 12, you had an incumbent Democrat. 16, it was Hillary's turn. And I would say now I'm too old, but Christ, I'd be right in the middle.
You feel like making a little news tonight?
I'm substantially younger than Bernie, slightly younger than Joe, and only a little older than Elizabeth.
I'm going to bring up the issue of temperament. I mean, you were both successful leaders. Governor Ridge, I was told by a veteran Capitol correspondent, who shall remain forever John Baer, that whenever he would talk to you, that you would always be incredibly even-tempered and gracious, even when you had really tough coverage, so to the point where that he thought maybe your staff weren't letting you read the bad stuff. I can't believe you weren't reading the stuff. I mean, talk about your relationship with the media and others, and you keep staying on an even keel.
Well, John is the one that they referred to in the opening remarks, said, I was the congressman nobody ever heard of from the city nobody ever went to, which I used very successfully during the primary for governor. I think they now know where he is, and hopefully they know who I am. Listen, it's the First Amendment. I mean, when you think how prescient, in my judgment, how prescient the founders of this country were to protect the press, who are the watchdogs. They are designed to probe. They are designed to be critical. They have an important role in democracy. Russia has a constitution that elevates the freedom of the press. How's that working out? In some other places. So my view is, and fortunately I had a great, got one of my press guys here, Steve Aaron was with me, Tim Reeves with me. The individual I hired to be my press secretary was Pittsburgh Post-Gazette?
Yes.
Okay. You know why I hired him? Because during the course of the campaign, I ran into a lot of great journalists, and John Baer was a treat. I'll tell you what, there's no holds barred with John. I mean, he would go right at you, which is fine. But I found that Tim Reeves and other journalists did their job effectively. And one of the reasons I decided, here's somebody who is in the profession of journalism, is respected by his peers, who understands that since I am the CEO or I am the governor of the Commonwealth, I have to be available, or he has to be available at 3 o'clock in the morning in case they got a deadline for the morning newspaper. And then I am accountable, good, bad, or indifferent, for what I've said and what the Commonwealth's done. That just goes with the territory. And those who lament negative articles and those who lament the criticism, I'm just, this is it's a critical part of a vibrant democracy to have a group of men and women out there who are going to hold you accountable for what you say and what you do, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And I would say that I have no idea, but I think we had a very good relationship with the press, and that doesn't mean they threw encomiums at my direction and there was a balloon drop and an orchestra playing every time they wrote an article. That's not their job, and I understand what their job is, and I accept it as a critical part of how our democracy works. Real simple for me.
It's easier to believe in that. Good. It's a little easier than that to believe in that as a principle than it is to act on it all the time. It can be tough. And Governor Rendell, I want to talk to you about this. And I want to just add another thought here. I don't want to just talk about dealing with reporters, but you, and I know you well because I covered you for 8 years as mayor, and you work yourself really hard, you overload your schedule, and you get frustrated at times, and you can be tough on not just reporters, but on your staff. A great city manager that I once admired told me that he had the habit of blowing up when things went wrong, and he realized, you know what, if I'm angry at people, I'm not going to get the information I need. They're going to be afraid of my anger. Now, I will say, I never heard anybody say that about you, Governor Rendell, but I'm interested in your assessment of your own temper, your volatility, and how it affected you as your ability to lead.
Dave, when I ran for district attorney, some of the episodes where I lost my temper as an assistant DA came up, and I was defending them as best I could. And then Justice Jim Mcdermott, I don't know how many of you remember him, he was a Supreme Court justice from Philadelphia, an incredible, dynamic man. He said to the Philadelphia magazine, he said, "It doesn't bother me at all. Show me a man or a woman who doesn't lose their temper, and I'll show you someone who doesn't care about anything." And that's what I believe as deep as I can. When I lost my temper at the media, and Dave, I'm going to ask you a question since you're no longer with the media. Yeah. Who was the most successful mayor in history in terms of answering every question, holding multiple press conferences?
You were very accessible and very candid.
I held more press conferences. As governor, I would hold a press conference on a specific issue. I would say to the press, "I'm taking questions on this issue only, but after we're finished, I'll stick around and answer questions for you on anything you'd like." And if I didn't have a press conference in a given week on an issue that I wanted to talk about, I would just go out into the reception room and open it up for questions. I never turned down any interview. I never punished any reporter in terms of saying, "You can't come around and ask me questions." But I would yell at reporters when I thought they were ignoring the facts to make their point. Because I think all of us have to teach each other lessons. And the lesson that I wanted to imbue with reporters, yes, we should talk to you, because Tom's exactly right. The only way a democracy works with as many people as we have now is if you're accessible to the media, because the media is the conduit to the people. And you have an obligation as a public official to be as available to the media as you can be and to answer every question. But the media doesn't come without some obligation of their own. And their obligation should be to take facts, and even when you know a fact is true, you don't leave it out of the story because it'll cut against the grain or the theme of your story. And I found too often reporters, not all by any means, but too often reporters would leave out facts that were salient to the story, but didn't go along with their theme. One example. Every time, I was a pretty good money raiser when I was mayor, and an even better money raiser when I was governor. And the Inquirer, every time we had to file a report, the Inquirer would go look at my report and find as many people as they could who had gotten city contracts who had contributed to me. And they asked me, doesn't this mean that you are pay for play? I said, well, listen, guys, let me explain this to you. The 3 most lucrative contracts I gave out, and I would explain to them that the bidders on those contracts were people who had raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for me. They didn't win the contract, and the winner was someone who hadn't given me a dime or I'd never met before they filed a response to the RFP. And I said, look, if you do the story, it's okay to do the story and delineate who gave me money that have city contracts, but include the fact that in the 3 biggest contracts I gave out as mayor, the winners were people who didn't give me a dime, and they won over bidders who had given me hundreds of thousands of dollars. That would be a fair story. Guess how many times some reporter wrote that story the way that I just said? Guess how many times? If you guess 0, you got it right. We have to teach too. It's okay to teach us, but we have to teach back.
I want to come back to something we were talking about earlier, when you both said there are times when you need to make a deal to get something important done with lawmakers who have, agendas of their own. And what's interesting about that, and a lot of people said that in particular Ed Rendell did a lot of that. I mean, you got education funding by bringing lawmakers in and figuring out what you could work out. That kind of transactional politics is not exactly the thing that we are proudest of in our politics, but it's a part of it. One of the things I've observed and have heard from others is that the legislature of your days had leaders who were willing to do that. They were willing to, the John Purzells, the Chip Brightbell, Dominic Pileggi, that the crew that are there now are more ideologically driven or have larger caucuses within them that are ideologically driven. And it just makes it harder to get to yes.
Let me take the first crack at that. Dave is exactly right. The problem that Governor Wolf has, and I think even Governor Corbett had a little bit, was that there are people in both parties, predominantly more in the Republican Party, who don't want anything because they don't want government to do anything. And it's very hard to make a deal with people who don't want anything. It's almost impossible. So that has created that lesson. But in terms of making deals, did you see the movie Lincoln, Dave?
Which movie?
Lincoln.
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yes, I did.
With Daniel Day-Lewis.
I did.
Remember the last line of the movie, what Tommy Lee Jones said to, he was Thaddeus Stevens.
Yeah.
What Thaddeus Stevens said to his mistress? He said, the most honest man in America just passed the most important legislation of our time by doing many corrupt and dishonest things, the deals Lincoln made with Republicans. Lincoln understood, you've got to, if you're going to get anything done in politics, you have to, I'll give you an example. My first job was district attorney. In the middle of my time as district attorney, the Supreme Court came down with the Mapp and Miranda decisions, which set up all these pretrial hearings, and we needed to hire 25 new district attorneys just to keep our head above water. So I went in to see George Schwartz, who was the city council president, later arrested and convicted in Abscam. He said to me, I was testifying, and he said to me, Mr. District Attorney, thanks for your testimony. Come make an appointment to see me the next day or two. So I went in to see him, and he said, we'll give you the money for your 25 assistant DAs, but we want to name 5 of them. And the thought went through my head, and I was young and idealistic. They're going to give me 5 just corrupt hacks. And I said, let me think about it, Mr. President. And I went back and I thought about it, and I said, hey, if I say no, I get 0. If I say yes, I get 20 good assistant DAs that I can hire. Maybe I'll get lucky on the 5, and I'll get some of them. I got lucky on 1 out of 5. And the other 4 I put in the support collection. Not that it wasn't important, but no one was going to get killed if they screwed anything up. And I got 20 assistant DAs. Did I do the right thing, letting him pick 5, letting council pick 5 assistant DAs? Is that a cruddy deal? Yeah, it's a cruddy deal, but it's the right thing to do. And you have to bite your lip every time you're trying to get something through the legislature that's hard. You're going to bite your lip and do what you think is right and get 80% or 90% or 68%. You got to do it. It's the reason we get nothing done anymore, because people are unwilling to do it because they're scared. You made a deal with the Republicans? If we got a full immigration bill that cured all our problems, the Dreamers, path to citizenship, etc., I'd give the bloody president $40 billion for a wall, because he wastes more than that on a daily basis anyway. And if the price of getting a good immigration bill is the wall, let's do it. I get burned alive on Twitter anyway, so let's do it. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. It's good for America. It's a good result with one bad thing, but it's on balance, a terrific result. you've got to do it, and there's no question you've got to do it, unless you control everything. And even if you control everything, sometimes you can't get everything through your own party.
I'll just note that that's a good deal unless the 5 DAs turn out to abuse the office, feed private information from grand juries to other people.
Well, I didn't
There's
say
a point at which...
I didn't say I wouldn't fire them.
Okay.
The obverse of that, just the flip side of that is that we made a conscious effort. Scott Baker's here to tell you when I'm led Chubb team from time to time to reach out to Democrats and recalcitrant Republicans to see, and I would say this in fairness to these men and women, the ask from them more often than not was at the margins. The ask wasn't to compromise any principle. Occasionally the ask was, as you as the Republican governor come into my district and laud me for supporting this legislation and the like. So I think, again, you asked the question about leadership before. You don't represent just the R's, and you don't represent the D's. It's the R's, the D's, the independents, and unfortunately, you got to represent even those people who don't think enough of their own citizenship to vote, which is one of my pet peeves. The flip side of that, yeah, of course, it's just to say, no. Now, the flip side of that is, and I can't speak to Ed's experience, but I know I had the word of a couple of legislators on critical pieces of legislation. And then, if you look me in the eye and tell me you're going to do something, you better do it. So those, over the period of time, that looked me in the eye and said, hey, Governor, I'm with you. And then the vote tally, they went the other way. That's the last time they saw the inside of the governor's office. It's the last time they saw me, and you're on your own. Don't come to me with any problems, because I'm not interested. Your word's your bond, right? I'd rather have somebody say, no, can't be with you, Gov, than say yes, as you're trying to count votes on some of these critical issues and go the other way. That's a non-starter as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Somebody who's smart and experienced in government ethics has said, we're never going to really get rid of corruption in this state because we have no limit on gifts, we have no limit on campaign contributions, and we elect all our judges. And it occurs to me, as I look at both of your tenures as governor, you both got a lot done. But you and others in the last decades, we've never imposed campaign finance limits, one of 10 states that did. Maybe that means less now that we have Citizens United and super PACs will be there anyway. We never had a serious effort at merit selection. Our redistricting process is still highly politicized. The election code needs reform. Why can't we do big reforms?
Well, I don't know. I think Ed and I have been working on merit selection for quite some time. That was a subject that
you both supported it, but the push it takes to get it done.
Listen, I think it's a legitimate question. I think we should have merit selection of judges. Local court, trial court, you kind of know who they are, where they're coming from, their background, their pedigree. I'm a strong proponent. One of the issues that I've gone 180 on, and I have to tell you that exactly, is I've gone from no term limits to absolutely term limits for everybody, state and local. I've just seen. And now, particularly the environment now, you run to win, but you win to govern. But right now, it just seems the mentality is you run to win, and you run to win, and you run to win, and you forget you got the second part of the equation. So we tried to do merit selection. I've gone 180 on the term limit. So I think that's an appropriate question for yours truly, and that's where I am now. Okay. And I know we're still working on merit selection. We're close. Democracy sometimes moves at glacier-like speed, but we're getting closer and closer.
And we both pushed hard to open up primaries. And it looks like there's a real chance that Pennsylvania will have an open primary, which is the best defense against the parties moving far to the left or far to the right. Open primaries where independents can vote in either primary they want, where people can vote in whatever primaries on the ballot that interests them. That would do a lot to bring the middle into every election.
I also think there needs to be the one thing it's just, you write that chapter as governor, you close the book, go back and revisit. I do think when it came to campaign contributions and finance, we on our own said everything we get over $1,000 is going to be on, even back then, publicly exposed. I'm a big believer in transparency. I'm not sure we're ever going to get the Supreme Court to put a cap on individual spending, but I, for one, and that's on both sides of the aisle, You know, people can put a big chunk of change in here, and by the time it's ventilated to two or three organizations, and the tagline is Pennsylvanians for stronger government. Well, what's that mean? So I do think when it comes to campaign finance reform, we're hard-pressed to put caps, but I think federally, statewide, any contribution in excess of $1,000 ought to be on the internet 24 or 48 hours after you give it, and no more bundling at the top and throwing it through these, and the unions don't like it, and some of the business groups don't like it, whether they like it or not. I think constituents are entitled to know where those dollars, either of support or opposition, came from, and not with this fuzzy notion that came from a group of people that are suddenly interested in you, even though half the money or more than half the money comes from outside your district.
Yeah, I agree with what Tom said. There has to be transparency, but there should be limits. John McCain and Russ Feingold passed what was called McCain-Feingold that limited the amount you could give to presidential and senatorial elections and congressional elections. And they came to Philadelphia, and I was mayor, and I stood with them and endorsed McCain-Feingold. And the Daily News wrote the next day, the editorial board wrote the next day, having Mayor Rendell endorse McCain-Feingold is like having Alibaba endorse a band on thievery. I didn't think that was very fair, but it was funny.
I will just share with you one of my favorite moments writing a piece of copy about Ed Rendell. Campaign finance reports, and Ed got lots of big contributions from lots of people, and we were going to make a list of the biggest ones. And the lead in the story was something like, Ed Rendell says, because he gets money from everybody, he doesn't owe anyone. Well, these are some of the people he doesn't owe the most. I like that.
Well, let me tell you this. In my first debate, which I crushed my opponent by 729 votes, we did a television debate, and we were asked.
For Congress.
This is running for Congress.
For Congress. Right. We were asked very directly from the moderator about PAC contributions. I know exactly who gave. I know exactly who gave my opponent. I told who contributed to me. He had a lapse of memory at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're unwilling to be associated with the individual or group giving you those dollars to support your election, then you just flat shouldn't take it, period. Real simple.
I want to move on to some audience questions, but what you just said reminds me of something when I spoke to Feather Houston, who served as your state welfare secretary. When you were calling to recruit her, and she said to me, she said something about, well, Governor, you didn't really know each other very well. She had worked in New Jersey, and she said, I just want to be sure that I'm not going to get political undue pressure. And she said, you said, I believe good government is good politics. And she remembered that all this time. So let me go to a couple of audience questions. Rick Stafford says, recent reports by the Brookings Institution have painted a worrisome picture in our state keeping up with the innovation economy. He notes the report suggests that beginning with Governor Thornburg and the Ben Franklin partnership, and with you two, there were efforts in this direction, but are we falling behind? What can the state do to respond in the areas of education, worker training and skill building, infrastructure, in particular high-tech infrastructure? Are we falling behind, and what can we do about it? Thoughts?
We've got to invest in innovation. I mean, the state had a huge surplus this year and virtually invested in nothing. Gave a pittance of money to education. It barely covered the increase in property taxes. And that money all went mostly to pensions of teachers and other groups, which deserve them, but it wasn't a real increase. We don't invest in higher education. We don't have many great programs. One of the things that I'm very proud of is that when I left office, Pennsylvania was third in the creation of green energy jobs, behind only California and Texas. And then we just stopped investing. Government is like everything else. You grow by investing. You spend money to make money. And if we stop investing in good programs, they should be highly supervised, highly looked after.
Notwithstanding, I think government has a responsibility to help build out infrastructure. Let's put that aside. That's something government should do. I think, and I'm not in a position to comment because I'm not that familiar with the details associated with growth within the state, although it just seems that we're making modest progress. But when you've got the great group of colleges and universities in this state, that needs to be at the epicenter and along with collaboration with the existing, with the private sector to drive that growth. Are there tax incentives that could be built into that? Yes, there are. But I'll tell you another thing that I think is critically important, and if I had a chance to, again, things have changed since I was governor, but my point of view on this issue has not changed. We spend too much time culturally thinking that our sons and daughters, in order to get a good job, have to go to college. And I will tell you, in the 21st century, in the digital forevermore, men and women with technical skills, willing to apply them across the board, should be encouraged. And if we're going to do anything to spur growth, capital is like water. It flows where it's unimpeded. So you keep the taxes down, you get the regs under control, but it wants to go where there's a good, skilled workforce. And today's skills require, frankly, far more electronic and technical sophistication than I could ever muster if I started being trained today. So I think we got the great colleges and universities. We did some of that with the digital greenhouse. We used tobacco money in this state way back when we got it, before I think the legislature took it from where we had intended it, just to fund some of this research with our institutions and some other initiatives. Continue to support these universities. I think the collaboration with the private sector is absolutely essential, and helping and identifying those skill sets, technical skill sets that will empower sons and daughters who culturally everybody brags where my son or daughter is going to college. We got to get out of that. There's some tremendous opportunities out there for young men and women. I know a very successful businessman. As a quick anecdote I'll give to you, he's got multiple dealerships in the region, multiple regions. His mechanics make $80,000 to $100,000 a year, and he can't find them. And so I know my friend Jim Mcdermott is in the audience, or some schools in this Commonwealth where they take a look at what you need in the community. They build up those technical skills. And I think if we want to grow, we've got to focus on the colleges and universities, infusion, tax incentives maybe with the private sector. We've got to think a little bit differently about how we're training our workforce. There's a lot of great opportunities out there for family-sustaining jobs. And I think culturally we're kind of reluctant to talk about that because everybody wants to have a college degree. Well, you're going to walk out of college with $100,000 in debt too, and may go back to a trade school to do something that you should have been focused on doing, but for cultural reasons you decided, well, maybe I better go to college first.
Well, I agree with a lot of what Tom said, but understand that those jobs, building trades jobs, require a much greater skill level than they did 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
When I was campaigning, I did an obligatory tour of the Sony plant when Sony had its plant south of Pittsburgh. And I did the tour and saw the huge TV sets. In those days, they had TV sets that were this big, and no flat screens. And then I spent an hour talking to the Sony executives. And I asked them what they thought they needed from the government, from the state government. And I thought they'd ask for a ramp off the turnpike or something like that. They said, education. Public education is failing in this state. We draw our workforce, 3/4 of our workforce is high school graduates. We draw our workforce from 5 southwestern Pennsylvania counties. And in the 10 years we've been here, we notice an absolutely measurable drop in the skill level of high school graduates. If you don't do something about public education, we're not going to be here very long. And they weren't.
Sean Cuff had a question. Can you think of something earlier in your life that inspired or motivated you to get involved in public service?
Well, for me, it was my father. My father was in the textile industry in New York. Never held office, never held party office, but loved the Democratic Party. He thought that FDR saved the country. And I remember my first experience was when I was 8 years old, and my dad and I were going around with Stevenson posters, tacking them up against the wall. And I wrote in my book, the only time I ever saw my dad cry, he died when I was 14, was the night that Stevenson lost Eisenhower in 52. We were out at a grocery store and we heard over the radio, there was no TV coverage, we heard over the radio that Eisenhower had won enough states to ensure his election as president. And walking back the 2.5 blocks to where we lived, for the first and last time I saw my dad cry. Didn't cry when his mom died, but he cried that night. And I was hooked.
And he died when you were a teenager, right?
I was 14, yeah.
Yeah. Governor Ridge, something come to mind for you?
My mom was a Republican committee woman. My dad was the Democrat in the family. We began at an early age, and I was the oldest of three, to have, my dad always had a second job, so even those short dinners, government and politics was part of the conversation. They respected the system, they respected the democracy, they respected the institutions of government. And then early impact on my life, I mean, the first job I had, the government paid for, was collecting refuse at a state park. The next paycheck, the long arm of the law drafted me and sent me overseas. You couple that with being a prosecutor, and all of a sudden you turn around, and every aspect of your life, there's some engagement, direct or indirect, by government. And I've always felt, whether it's a local government all the way to the national government, one person, wherever it's a school district, county council, Congress, whatever it is, if you're focused, you can make a difference. And so for me, it was, there wasn't any particular moment, although I learned at an early age to respect the institutions of government and to appreciate the privilege of being an American citizen. And if you have a chance to go in and affect change, you ought to try to do it.
You were an infantry sergeant in Vietnam, right?
Correct.
Decorated. How does that fit in? What skills or strengths did it give you that affected your political career, do you think?
Well, I think most veterans writ large, and certainly combat veterans, would tell you that that's an experience. Hopefully they don't dwell on it because it's a chapter in their lives, but you can draw from it so much. And as I look back, I was the only college graduate. Actually, I had 1 year of law school. My brother was 15 years younger. I thought it was pretty exciting. I got a notice from a letter from President Nixon telling me I was drafted. I didn't quite share his enthusiasm, but but I do think, and you got these young men and women coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and hopefully their state of mind, there's still a lot of, I mean, there's some PTS out there, and it's a significant problem. But I think most veterans, fortunately, come back. It's an important chapter in their lives, and I like to think most have had the opportunity to do what I do. Memories, some are shared, some are not, but you don't dwell on it, you draw from it. And there's a lot of lessons you can draw personally from having the opportunity to serve your country in that fashion.
Karen Crenshaw notes that the racial climate in America is growing tougher each day. You have the growth of white supremacist groups and serious issues of conflict between the black community and police in many cities. What can we do to resolve this racial divide in the country? Thoughts?
Well, you have to have government at all levels that's fair and that's really transparent. I just don't understand why so many people in the government don't understand that the best thing you can do to convince people that you've taken the right action is be transparent, but be transparent from the get-go. And if you're not going to arrest a policeman for using a gun and shooting and killing a young man who wasn't armed, you've got to tell the story early on of why you're not arresting him. If you've got a body cam or a camera attached to a car, you better show that right at the beginning, not later, because later people think, oh, well, they doctored it. Take it on from the beginning and try to resolve it. And you have to establish a reputation for being credible. If you establish a reputation for being credible, then you can do things that the community at first blush doesn't like, because you've got a reputation for calling them as you see them, for calling them fairly. And there is a basic fairness to government. They are difficult problems. They are very difficult problems, many of the problems that face black and white. But you've got to be honest. Like, it drives me crazy when people in our party talk about reparations. Look, what we did to African Americans was unconscionable. But we can't get involved in reparations. What we should get involved with is creating every possible avenue of opportunity for African American kids in this country. Every possible opportunity. That's the way to repay what we did as a society by enslaving people. But we've got to be honest about it, not give phony solutions, and not worry about so much how things look all the time. You know, it's almost laughable, and a lot of my African American colleagues almost laugh. It became almost an imperative to appoint certain African Americans to only certain cabinet positions. That you'd never have an African American Secretary of State. Well, we did, thanks to President Bush. But for the longest time, there were only slots. We put people in slots. And you can't do that. You put people in the positions that they've earned. But your actions and your words together create an element of fairness. But transparency and openness quickly and consistently, that's the key to developing a fair country, in my judgment.
Governor Rich? Yeah.
You know, Ed and I have talked about this on a couple occasions. We agreed that when you watch the Olympic team in the Summer Olympics, and you know they have the opening parade, there's only one country that looks like the United Nations. It's us. I mean, so this whole notion of we understand racial diversity in this country, but we're not willing to say that racism exists. And by the way, it's 360. We circle the wagons. I mean, there's racism going in multiple directions. So if you accept that as a premise, and note that it is still far better today than it was. It clearly was. I remember going into I know you're going to be shocked, but I was at Fort Polk, Louisiana, went into a bar one night. And a couple of my buddies were with me, and one was an African American. And we all are going over to Southeast Asia. I'll never forget this. And our buddy was with us. And the guy put his hand under the counter and said, "Well, we don't serve that kind in here." I'm thinking, boy, isn't this great? This man's going to wear the uniform of this country, and the color of his skin, you're not going to serve him with beer. So obviously we left. Who knows what he had underneath? I had an idea. So let's say that it exists. But it goes in, it's 360, it exists a lot. You have to call it out when you see it. And the Ku Klux, there are no good people in the Ku Klux Klan. Let's just get that really straight.
Let me, Governor Rich, what do you think when you hear people say that President Trump is a racist and that he encourages white supremacy? I'm interested in both of your reaction to that, because some would say you're alienating, supporters of the president who aren't racist.
Well, I'm going to let people draw their own conclusions, but I'm going to tell you this. If you, as a leader, suggest that there's some really good people in this organization that it is a racist organization, and you deny that you even know David Duke, okay? And if you think that those are coming across the border, have different colored skin, maybe from Mexico, Central and South America, they're rapists and they're drug pushers, and the list goes on and on and on. You can draw whatever conclusion you want. The conclusion you may want to draw is that this is a president who has refused to accept the diversity of this great country and who refuses to embrace that his obligation and responsibility is to try to elevate all within this country, and not for political advantage, looking to appeal to a small group of people, cast them aside and treat them as second and third class citizens of its citizens all. I don't like the rhetoric. Again, throwing that word around and accusing him of being a racist doesn't may make some people feel good, but it doesn't solve the problem because we still have racism in this country. So put his rhetoric aside. What are we going to do as a country to address it? You got to speak out. If he's not going to speak out, leaders on both sides of the aisle need to speak out. There has to be a lot more work at the local level. For every bad example with the police interacting with sadly, in some of these murders, there are plenty of good examples where people of color have a great collaborative working relationship with their police force. And we need to start elevating some of those stories. And we also need, I'd like to see stronger leadership within that community. And I'd like to think that maybe working with the religious leaders in the African American community might be the best way we can go. But so it exists. Let's address it. Forget people's rhetoric aside. Still at grassroots level, I think we got a lot of work to do.
Governor, you want to add anything? No.
I'd say if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck and acts like a duck, it's a duck. And forget everything else. All the other words. Do you know ICE is deporting Hispanic citizens who served in our military? Did you read that a couple of days ago? How dare they? How dare they? These are people who served abroad, put their lives on the line, and we're deporting them. What the F is wrong with this country? I'm being serious. What's wrong with us that we'll countenance an administration that does that? What is wrong with us when we take babies away from their parents? And some of those babies will never see their mothers or fathers again. What's wrong with us? How do we allow that to happen? How do we, the people, allow that to happen? Forget the guy in the White House. How do we stand by and let that happen? You know, the best defense against racism is us. And we've got to speak out loud and clear. And actually, it's just unspeakable. Muslims, to ban all Muslims coming into this country. I will tell you, Philadelphia is a city of 1.5 million people. And we probably have about 40,000 Muslim citizens. They are among the most law-abiding citizens in the city. They teach their kids to respect authority, to respect education, to not take drugs. They're good people. They're good Americans. They fight for America. They do things to make us proud. And to stop all Muslims from coming into the country, what message does that give? It's unspeakable.
The evening's getting a little long here, but I just want to return to the 5 years when Ed Rendell was mayor of Philadelphia and Tom Ridge was governor of Pennsylvania. And you worked together pretty effectively on quite a number of things, getting us a national political convention, getting a shipyard, financing stadiums, some other things. There was a story in the Inquirer I saw by Russ Eshelman that talked about this partnership between Rendell, the balding, ebullient salesman, and Tom Ridge, the good-looking, less than outspoken Republican. And as you guys looked at each other, I'm wondering what you thought of one another at the time. And particularly, were there ever times that you looked at each other and said, wow, that was good. I wish I'd thought of that. Or wish I could do like that. I wish I looked, maybe Rendell thinking he wished he looked as good in a bomber jacket as Tom Ridge does. I don't know. What are your memories of how you regarded each other in that period?
Well, I regarded Tom as a very good Republican, which puts him probably a little bit ahead of a mediocre Democrat. But Tom Ridge, if you get to know him, Tom can be a little, because he's such an imposing presence, can be a little scary until you get to know him. But when you get to know him, he's a wonderful human being in every aspect. And we would disagree on certain things, but we disagreed without being disagreeable. And we disagreed on something on Monday, and on Wednesday we agreed on something that was very important for the city and the state. And we always had a little bit of fun. I was wondering if I did a lead in to tell this story, but I want to tell a story about the Third Circuit had a case argued before it about whether the state legislature would be required to give more equal funding to the school districts. Republicans in Harrisburg resisted it because that would have shifted a lot of money to the poorer school districts, which were Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and the like. But for us, it was a lifeline. It was the only way I thought we would get really adequate education funding. Although Tom was good on specific programs, on general funding, we thought the legislature held us back. So one day the Third Circuit decided in our favor. And one of my favorites in the Ridge administration was Tim Reeves, Tom's Secretary of State. In fact, Tim and I collaborated when Tom got the gold medal at the Pennsylvania Society. Tim helped me write a speech about the 10 reasons, top 10 list like David Letterman, the 10 best reasons that Tom Ridge was worthy of this award. But we love to tweak Tim. So we got the news a little earlier than they got it in Harrisburg. So we did a press release from the mayor's of Philadelphia's office, which went to one fax machine. That was the fax machine in Tim Reeves' office. And the release began in a beautifully crafted opinion by the Honorable Marjorie O. Rendell. The Third Circuit decided that Philadelphia should get a whole lot more money. And apparently, Tom didn't, I don't know if you ever heard this story, Tom, but the people in the press office told me that Tim Reeves took it out of the fax machine, read it, and said, "This is a disgrace. Let's impanel a grand jury." And someone said, "Tim, I think they're kidding."
It's a good one.
Well, I want to put, Ed and the great relationship with Mayor Murphy on a couple of these issues. And here's when you grow up in the household that I did, bipartisan or apolitical, everyone said, Ed wanted to be the best mayor he could be and do everything he possibly could do for 1.5 million of his constituents. I wanted to be the best governor I could be for 12 million Pennsylvanians. Did we have disagreements? Yeah. Welfare reform, workers' comp. Part of it reflected our philosophy as to how you adjust those programs. But he's got his beliefs. I have my beliefs. We articulate them very well. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, and you move on. But there were several issues that transcended anything political that I needed, and the state needed, bipartisan support and major urban support. And I will tell you, whether it was the shipyard, whether it was the stadia, frankly, this wouldn't be involving Mayor Murphy or Mayor Rendell, but even some of the environmental reforms we would do. We needed some Democrat state senators, strong environmentalists, so we pulled them in because they wanted the best. So I think one of the challenges is to just accept the reality that he's registered as a Democrat for one reason, I'm registered as a Republican for a set of reasons, but also accept the reality that there are causes bigger than perhaps the party's platform, or there are causes that transcend it, and you got to work. And it was, hey, Ed's a good time. Ed works hard. He was always straightforward with me. When we disagreed, there was no question about the disagreement, and we just move on and find those. But I think some of the work we did together with you and some of the work I did with Mayor Murphy speaks to that notion of bipartisanship, which is lost today in this very toxic environment. We got the Republican convention in, we got the Republican convention in Philadelphia. Good for Philadelphia, good for the state. So, I mean, it's, you kind of, if you hang around with Ed long enough, you're going to end up liking him. And you like to deal with people you like to deal with. That's the way it is.
That is true. That you spend much more time with people you like to deal with than you don't, than the others.
Yeah. I want to bring the evening to a close, but I'm going to ask you each to leave us with a closing thought. And, we began by talking about the poisonous atmosphere of partisanship in the country. And I want to ask each of you to tell us how optimistic or pessimistic you are about the direction of the country. And anything else you want to share as we close? Who wants to go first?
Well, I still remain guardedly optimistic because of the history of the country. The country almost always seems to be resilient and almost always tends to bounce back from difficult times. And I think what we need, whether the next president is in 2025 or in 2021, we need someone to come and strike the right tone and respect the other side, respect other views. You know, I am, as Tom is, I'm solidly pro-choice. I believe that's a personal choice that the government has no business interceding. But I respect people who are legitimately pro-life because they believe it, because it's part of their religious faith. And there's no reason you should try to denigrate any of your opponents. Someone has to lift the country, and they lift the country by first lifting the process, by first respecting everyone. And I think that some leader will emerge, because men and women are all fallible. None of us are perfect, obviously, we all know that. But the next president, whoever that is and whatever that is, has to be a good person who's willing to try to meet somewhere in the middle, who's not afraid of doing the right thing. If I could have advised Joe Biden, who's a friend of mine, but I'm not an insider or anything, I would have said, Joe, tell everyone you're running for president, but you're going to serve one term because you're going to try to heal this country. And to heal it, you've got to make people understand that you have no, once you're elected, you have no political agenda. You have no political motivation. You're going to act solely in behalf of the country. You can pick a younger vice president. It'd be hard to pick an older vice president. You can pick a younger vice president and groom that person, but govern like you're going to be say you're going to be one-term president and bring the country together. I think Joe Biden has qualities that could do that. I think there are people on the Republican side. I would love to see John Kasich be the Republican nominee. I think he could bring the country together. I had occasion when I was mayor of Philadelphia to work with John Kasich when he was budget secretary. He came in and he asked us to advise him on how the budget he was proposing would affect cities. And he actually listened. I thought it was just, a public relations stunt. He actually listened. So the next governor has to be a person, a woman or a man of good faith, and who really cares about the country first, and who will not worry about re-election. God knows we need someone who's not going to worry about re-election. And I think it can be done, because Americans are still at heart good people. They're still at heart, they're good people, but we do need someone who will appeal to our better angels. And if someone does that and does it strongly and consistently, I think the country will come back, but I'm not sure it'll happen.
Governor Ridge.
I appreciate the question. Frankly, I think a Ridge Rendell ticket is the answer. Although Ed said he thought the Rendell Ridge ticket was the answer. I want to put the politics of the presidential election aside. Here's a couple of things I'd like to see happen. I would like to see the Democrats, I know they're proceeding along with the investigation, but spend more time talking about health care and the issues that are germane. There's a lot of issues they could talk about. It's health care, it's infrastructure. There are a lot of things going on out there. And change just the nature of the debate. Just bring it back a little bit more to governing. Now, that'll maybe it may not put pressure on the president, but it may put some pressure on the Senate, because I want Americans to need to understand that it's a good thing that legislation moves at glacial-like speed, but they've got to elevate some of these important policy issues just to get America thinking about something other than President Trump and about the governance. The other thing I would like to see, and this is long-term, this is a wonderful forum, I want civility to be celebrated, not just on college campuses. And by the way, the only thing that would have made this a better evening if there had been a couple thousand Pitt students in here. That's not a criticism, it's just an observation I make because I know Ed and I love talking to younger audiences, but government and politics is about tomorrow. The leaders you elect today will affect change, good, bad, about tomorrow. And young people at the University of Pittsburgh and universities across this country have far more tomorrows than Ridge and Rendell. And I'd like to think that both parties would not be strident in their approach. I talked to a woman the other day who took they're not quite voting age yet, but took them to a Republican rally, and she thought they were leaning Republican, but they turned to their mother and said, I think we might be Democrats. They didn't like the mean-spirited nature of the public conversation about the political world. And I think ultimately the change, we need to raise some issues, and right now, I hope they do that in the House. The Senate doesn't seem to be doing a great deal. That's one thing. But I also think that parties need to reach out to young people. And then finally, elevating this whole notion of civility to make it a national conversation. You're having a dispute with your next-door neighbor. You're not going to resolve it by yelling at each other profanities across the back fence. And so I think there's a lot that we can do. I think that Ed used the word resilient. This is a very, very special place. We're all so blessed to be citizens of this country. I think we are entitled to expect more from both sides of the aisle. This disconnect, this discord just didn't happen the past 3 years under President Trump. He's thrown some kerosene on the fire, there's no question about that, but it happened a long time ago. So I think the leaders of both parties, and I mean the party chairman and the leaders in the House and the Senate and down to the state level, need to rethink their roles and responsibilities as public servants. If we can get that and get more young people engaged and start demanding civil dialogue and demanding that kind of relationship. Ed and I didn't disagree on a lot of things, but boy, I'll tell you what, when we agreed, we were pretty good. And finally, I will tell you, this is a monologue, but I work with a college, Allegheny College, you know where it is, it's in Meadville, Pennsylvania. This is the 8th year we gave out a civility award. 1 year we gave it to Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. They are 180 apart. They traveled together. They went to the opera together. 1 year we gave it to Vice President Biden and John McCain. Opposite sides, enormous respect for them. This year we gave it to 2 congressmen. A Republican from Georgia who's a Trump supporter through and through, and a young black man from Brooklyn. He said, I'm from the People's Republic of Brooklyn. So you know where he's coming from. They collaborated together on a very significant piece of that criminal legislation that was passed. If you would have listened to them talk about their differences and the respect they have for each other, and I said that should be viewed by every member of the House and Senate. So let's get civility. Let's have more forums like this. And frankly, in my judgment, it'd be great to have more Democrats that reach across the aisle like my friend Ed Rendell, period. And Republicans need to do the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you both. I want to invite Chancellor Gallagher up for a closing thought.
Thank you. That was terrific. Dave Davies, thank you for a great evening and a gracious and wise and probing set of questions. I also want to extend a special thanks to Governor Ridge and Governor Rendell. You know, as somebody who spent more than 20 years as a public servant, you have both shared with us tonight a living example of what leadership means, that it's about serving our country and putting our common interests first And when we do that, we draw from our differences to have a richer palette for solving our common problems. So I want to thank you both for sharing that with us today and for your leadership in this Commonwealth and in this country. And finally, I want to thank Governor Thornburgh. First of all, congratulations to you and Ginny for the recognition tonight, but I want to thank you most of all for creating this forum, for creating a place where we get together to discuss the tough issues of our time. I would agree with the sentiments here that nothing could be more important. And finally, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight to make this evening so special. On behalf of the University of Pittsburgh, thank you, and please let's give one final round to all of our speakers.